Hi, in this video I'm going to talk about lips and putting on lipstick. And one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because I want to show you how to use a feature called blend if. See, many times when we apply some kind of an effect over an image, we only want that effect to be applied based on the light and dark areas of the actual image. We don't always want to apply it everywhere. We sometimes want to say only in these areas based on what's below it. And it's the blend if which allows us to do that. Well, putting some color on her lips gives us a really good opportunity to explore this blend if option. So if you'll notice on her lips, right about there, there are some very light areas, there are some darker areas, there is some kind of in between, there's some texture and all kinds of things going on. So what we're actually going to do in this case is we're going to apply a couple of colors, one which we'll put in the darker areas and one which we'll put in the lighter areas, and it's the blend if that allows us to differentiate between the two. So the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to just dump a color on here and then specify where it needs to go. And we're going to work with the dark areas first. Now, if her top lip, let's say much darker than the bottom lip, I might do this in a couple of stages, and maybe I would do it here for this one. But I think for this purpose, we can get by with doing it to both lips at the same time. All right, so now I've already chosen some colors. I spent a bit of time and poked around with colors until I found a couple that I think would work. So let me just grab that color number and we'll use that. All right, so first step, we're going to get an adjustment layer, solid color, and I'm going to paste in the number for that color. Okay, this is a problem because right now this color, this adjustment is being applied to everything. Well, every adjustment layer comes with its own built-in mask, which you see right next to the color. And as with any mask, anything which is in the white is part of the selection, and that's where the effect is applied. Anything which is black is not part of the selection or is not selected, and the color will or the adjustment will not be applied there. Well, right now the whole thing is white, which means everything is in the selection, and this color is going everywhere. So the first thing we have to do is invert that. Instead of applying everywhere, I want to apply nowhere. So with the mask selected, I'm going to do Control or Command I to invert, I for invert. You'll see now that the mask is black, nothing is selected, and that effect is being applied to nothing. This is very important because now I can go back and specify where I want it to go. All right, and the way I do that, I need to brush with white to put it in the selection. So B for brush, I've got the mask selected, and my colors over here are black and white. I need to switch those. I want the white color in the foreground. And now with that in mind, I can brush on with white. It adds to the selection, which means that color is going to go in the selected areas. So the other quick thing to notice, lips don't really have a very sharp edge. They're more of a feathered edge. Even if we wanted a fairly sharp edge, I'm not going to choose 100% hardness, maybe like 70 or 80, but in this case it's a very soft edge, so I've got my hardness down at, let's do it about 20, something right around there. Okay, so now when I brush with white, it adds to the selection, and the effect will go into the selected area, in which case, in this case, it means we're going to apply the color. And I'm going to just cover it up. I know I've covered up her teeth a bit also. We're going to fix that in just a moment. Let me get a slightly smaller brush, put some over here as well. It doesn't have to be all that perfect because in a moment we're going to adjust it. Okay, so what we basically have done is we've taken a color, we've just dumped it on top of the underlying image. Well, I don't want it to do that, obviously. I want those colors to blend together so I can see the ridges and the variations and all of that. So I need to change the layer type to something which is going to allow the colors to blend together. So I don't want a normal layer, which is where it currently is. I want something which will create a darker color because we're doing the dark parts. So these 5 up here, from darken down to darker color, these 5 will all create a darker color. And right below that, we have their exact opposites from lighten to lighter colors. So, and they are opposites. So here the first one is darken, here the first one is lighten. Here the last one is darker color, here the last one is lighter color. They're opposites. All right, so what I want to choose in this case actually is multiply, which takes the color values of the underlying image and multiplies them with the values of the layer that we just applied, multiplies them together, and now you've got a darker color. Well, one of the advantages to doing this now is I can see exactly what's going on underneath, and now I can refine my mask to make sure that that effect is only going to be where it's supposed to be. So let me get a slightly larger brush, and let me get a black color. Slightly larger brush, blah, 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 blah. Okay, and bring it down, maybe not quite so big. All right, now with my black, I can, on the mask, brush, black color, I can kind of go in these areas out here where I don't want it, and it will remove it from the selection, which means it removes it from the area where that color can be applied. All right, a little better. Great thing about masks, one of the reasons why I love them is you can always go back and change them. Either just brush with black or white, or fill with black and white to add and subtract. Ooh, that's a lot. Also, you'll notice that I put quite a bit of color on her lips, so let me get a smaller brush, so, and with black, I'm going to come in here and brush with black to remove it from the selection, which means that color cannot be applied there. It is out of the selected area. And as a result, I can take the color off of her teeth. So, just like that. Let me come up a little more down here. Okay, better. Oops. Better. Yeah, much better. It sure does make her lips look bright, or her teeth look bright though, don't they? But that's the original color. All right, now we have an issue. This color is being applied indiscriminately to everything inside the selection. So that's not good. We want to apply this dark color only in the dark areas, which means we want to hide it from the light areas. And to do that, we have to use that blend if feature. Now, there's 2 ways to get there. You can go to layer, to layer style, to blending options, which is kind of a pain in the neck, and brings up our layer styles. Cancel. But the easiest way is this. Over here on our layer, you've got the color icon, the mask icon, and then the big open gray area over here. I'm going to simply double click on the gray area, and it automatically brings up my layer styles. Now, what are we looking at? If you'll notice, there are 2 light to dark continua at the bottom here. And if we make adjustments to the top one, which is called this layer, basically it says apply this effect based on the light and dark of this layer. Well, this layer only has that color in it. So we want to apply it based on the underlying layer, which is her actual picture, where we've got all those variations. Now here's what we're looking at. So ignore this layer and look at underlying layer. So there's 2 sliders. There's a darkness slider and a lightness slider. And if we move one of these sliders, it's going to affect where, it's going to change where the effect is applied, the adjustment is applied based on light and dark. So on the brightness slider, anything which is brighter than that point on the continuum, the effect will not be applied. Anything which is darker the effect will be completely applied. And that is very important because I can start moving this slider down to begin to target just the areas where I want the darker color to be applied. Okay, looks like crap. It's very pixelated and chunky, and here's where it gets powerful. This little slider is actually not one slider. It's actually two sliders which just happen to move together at the same time, and I can split them apart. To do that, I'm going to Alt click on the slider, and you'll see now they have split into two pieces. They work exactly the same though. Anything which is lighter than the top slider is going to, the effect is going to not be applied. If it's brighter than the slider, it is not applied. If it's darker than the bottom slider, it will be completely applied. And in between is a transition from invisible to completely visible. And that allows us to apply this effect in a much more natural way. So it's not just suddenly on off, it's bright off, dark on, and a transition in between them. So that's pretty cool. So I'm going to actually bring this light slider pretty far down until I'm just barely hitting the edges of the lips. And then I'm going to adjust my upper slider so that it is not being applied to the very brightest areas. We're doing the darks here first. We're going to come back in a moment and do the lights. Okay. That looks pretty decent. Okay, so hit OK. Better? Much better. Okay. Now we're going to do the opposite. So we've done the dark areas. Now we need to go back and do the light areas. So the first step, of course, to the process is dump on some color in a mask and then change the selection so that it's just around the lips. But we've already done that. And there's no reason to do it again if we've already done it because it's the same area we're talking about. So instead of going through that process again, I'm going to simply take the color layer that's already there and I'm going to duplicate it. I can right click on it and duplicate is up here, or I can just do Control J. Alright, so what I have done, the first color, I multiplied it with the skin colors below it. Now I've applied it again and it's still multiplying with all the layers below it, so now it's really, really dark. But we're going to fix that. The reason why we duplicated is simply because we already have the area, the masked area selected. Alright, so let's change a few things. The first thing we're going to change is the layer style. See, it's still multiplying right now because that's what we duplicated. But we want to we want to add this to the bright area, so we want a lighter color. So instead of multiply, we're going to take its opposite, which is screen. And now it is a much lighter color. Basically, it's screening out the darker colors and leaving just the new color. Okay, still looks like crap. Not a problem. We're going to fix it up. One thing we can do is we can double click on these two little squares. Those two little squares tell us that we have used the blend if options, like here's no, here's yes, and here's blended together. So let's just go ahead and just reset that. And I'm going to take those sliders and move them back all the way up. Okay, that's the first thing. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to change the color, because her lips have, and all lips have, multiple colors in them. We already have the color for the dark area. Now let's get a color for the light area. Well, again, I've already picked out a couple of colors, so let me just go and grab that. So there's the color I chose, copy it, and go down here to this one that we want. We're going to paste it in down here. And you can obviously fool around, figure out, take the time and figure out what color is going to work. You can always change it later, which is great. Okay, but I wanted this one, so okay. Now, this is being applied everywhere. We only want this to be applied in the light area, so we have to go back to blend if. So again, I'm going to double click on this gray area over here. Now before, we wanted to hide the color from the light areas, but this time we want to hide the color from the dark areas. So we're going to be working with our darkness slider, and it works exactly the same way. Anything which is darker than the slider, the effect will not be applied. Anything which is brighter is where the effect will be applied. And again, we can split these in half to create a transition from one to the other. So I want it to be applied in just the very brightest. And now I'm going to bring this down to kind of add it to a little more and a little more. So it's being hidden only from the very darkest areas. A little bit like that. And see, that puts a very nice sheen on her lips. Now, if I were to just push these back together again, it's either yes or no, and that gives us that kind of ugly pixelated. Well, one advantage is we can also see what's happening around the edges. All right, but let me come up so it's just barely in the brightest. I'm going to split it with Alt, and then I'll drag it back down to apply to a little more and a little more, like so. Let's see where we are. Much better. Ooh, very bright and shiny. We're gonna reduce the intensity of this in just a moment. So the other thing that I see is around her top edge now, I've got that very brightest color up there. I don't want it up there. I want darkness around the edge. What I could do is I could add a third color and only target the darkest of the dark areas. I can use as many colors as I want. I could do like one for the very dark, and then one for the mid-tones, one for the high tones, and so forth. But for the purpose of what we're doing here in demonstrating how this works, I think this is going to be sufficient. But regardless, I don't want that brightest color up around the edge. So, like anything else you can change with adjustment layers, I'm going to change the mask. So I select the mask, I get a brush, maybe a little bigger, and very soft brush. And I'm simply in black color, I'm simply going to brush up here with black to remove it from the selection, which means that color cannot be applied there because it's now out of the selection. I'll do a little down here also. All right, that's quite a bit more natural now. Oh yeah, much better. Okay, now the last thing is this. I like these two colors, and I think they look good on there, but it's just too much. I'm not really seeing enough of the underlying texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift and click to select both of those, both of the color layers, and then I'm either going to hit my group button or Control G to group them together. So there they are there. They are grouped together. And now I can change the opacity of the entire group at once. The two color layers are at 100%, but I want to bring down the upper limit for 100%. So I'm going to change the opacity of the entire group at once, just a little bit, just to reduce the intensity somewhat and let a little more of that natural color come through. And I think there's too much brightness in there. So let me come back and do a little something here also. I want this to be a little less. Better. Okay, and you can fool around with it, however you want, but I think that looks pretty good. It's got a nice shine on it from the overhead lights now. So if I turn this entire group off, we get that. And if I turn this entire group on, we get that. So there we go. The reason why this looks even relatively natural is because I've used that blend if feature. So that's how it works. It's very powerful for targeting specific or selecting specific light and dark areas based on the underlying image. And that allows us to apply an effect just where we want it to go and still have it look pretty natural. So that's blend if, and that is how we get some natural looking color on somebody's lips. And that's all there is to it. So I hope you found it useful. Bye.